Okay, so we're going to go back over how to create those topo lines from your surface again. So I just have a brand new SketchUp drawing. I'm going to go ahead and bring in my terrain. So I'll click on the Add Location button and wait, which is always good. And apparently SketchUp crashed on me, so we'll try this one again. Perhaps I should get rid of a few things that are open right now. Alright. Okay, let's try this again. So let's add location. There we go. And we'll click on Select Region, which will give us a region, and we'll go ahead and click Grab. We can adjust the region with these little pins. Go ahead and click Grab, and that will bring in the terrain. Now the problem is, by default, the terrain is perfectly flat, so we need to show the terrain. So I'll go up here to the File menu and go to Geolocation, Show Terrain, which will show that little piece of the terrain that we were after. Okay. So once we have that little piece of the terrain, now the next question is, how do I cut those contours through it? Because if we go to Styles and we go to our standard lines, we're not going to see anything, and so we'd like to be able to see those contours. So let's go back to our basic style here, and what we'll do is we'll create a surface that's larger than the terrain itself. So I'll draw this, make sure it's larger than the surface itself, and I can orbit around to make sure that that is the case, which it is. And I'm going to adjust this so that it's below the surface. And so I could, to make that easier, switch my view into a front view, in which case we can kind of look at this. Let me switch into a parallel projection. Right now we can see where this surface is and how it intersects. And so let's just use the Move tool, and we'll move this down ever so slightly, we hope, so that it's below my terrain as a whole, okay? Which it is now. Let's go back into a 3D view so we can see this a little bit. There it is. Now what I want to do is I'd like to make a bunch of copies of this surface vertically so that I'm intersecting the surface. And I'm going to do this at every contour interval that I want. And since the model that I was doing was relatively close together, the contour interval that I picked was 1 foot. You could do it at 10 feet, you could do it at 100 feet, depends on how big the terrain is around your particular model. So I'll go ahead and select the surface. And for you guys, it's the Control key is going to allow you to turn on the Move feature. So if I press the Control key, for me it's the Alt key, but if I press the Control key, it's going to give me a little plus next to my Move symbol, which I don't have to stay holding down. It's going to stay on once I press it. And I'm going to drag this up, which is creating a copy for me. And it's going to be on the blue axis, and I want to set the distance at 1 foot. And so I go ahead and do that, and it creates that 1 foot. Now I'd like to repeat this many, many times. And so instead of doing 1 foot, 1 foot, 1 foot, after I've done it, I'm just going to type 100x. And that's going to repeat it 100 times, right? Which gives me 100 little surfaces that are 1 foot apart. So if I were to zoom in, we'd see there they all are at 1 foot apart. And I'd like to use each of those surfaces to intersect with my model itself. Now I'm missing a little bit of the terrain up here, but my building is going to be right here in the center, so I'm not overly concerned about that. So once I have those set up, I'm going to select all the surfaces. I'm going to right click on those surfaces, and I'm going to say make a group. And I like to make a group because it's much easier to select that than all of the individual surfaces. So we'll make that a group. And for organization's sake, let's also show the layers window here, just so that I can turn on and turn off either the terrain. Sorry, I need a temporary layer here. Or, yeah, okay, there we go. Or my topo, let's rename these to be topo planes. So I can turn on and turn off the topo planes and my topo itself. So with that done, I'm going to make sure that my planes are on and my topo is on and nothing else is on. And I'll select both my group and the surface itself. Notice though when I select the surface it shows up as red. That means it's locked and I need to unlock it. So with that selected, I'll go to unlock and it'll show up as blue. Now I can pick the surface and my group of objects here. And I'm going to right click and say intersect faces with selection. And it'll take a little bit of time to do it. It's always nice to have a layer that's separate and apart from the other existing layers so that the lines that are created are going to go onto that layer. And so we just have to be a little bit patient, and it will then intersect all of these surfaces. So if I were to turn off the terrain and turn off my layer 0 and zoom in, we'd see that it's created a bunch of lines. Okay. Now, unfortunately, given this style, we've got a little bit of overlap on the ends, and that's going to cause this to look a little bit more patterned than it otherwise would. If I switch the style, let's go to the hidden line style, which is right here. This is going to look a little bit better. But if we look at it closely, we can see that the terrain itself is modeled on these little polygons. So I've got a rectangle here, and so there's a little bit of straight edge to it, and that's always going to be the case. So if we were to switch now into our standard views top and we were to look down on this, right, you can see that there's always going to be these little straight segments, and that's just the nature of the terrain, so there's nothing we can really do about that. And so now I have this set up. I've got my topography line set up, and these lines are going to show up in this hidden line mode, right? That's separate and apart from the terrain itself, which is a surface, which we can turn back on if we want. And that would be if we had a, let's just illustrate this here. Hold on, I need to switch so that we can see this. I wanted a flat surface. Turn this off. I just want to illustrate the shadows here for a second. Really? There we go. Okay, so if we go back into the top view, and I were to turn on shadows, and go to View, Shadows, there we go. Okay, so right now, without the terrain on, right, it's casting a shadow from this box right down onto the ground plane perfectly flat, okay, even though the contour lines are there. If I were to turn the terrain on, however, the shadow that's being cast is going to vary based on where it is in the terrain. Does that make sense? Right, so it's two different shadows. So when you're casting the exterior shadow of a floor plan, you want to make sure that the surface of the terrain is actually on so that you're casting the shadow correctly, okay? And that's separate and apart from the contour lines, which are their own separate entity. Okay, does that kind of make sense? Yeah. So I'll help you go back through it if you're still struggling. But that was going back through creating the contours in SketchUp.